He carried a dead woman's ring in his pocket for 5 years. Now she was standing 20 feet above him, covered in flour, laughing at something one of the children said. And Roman Viscari understood, with absolute certainty, that every war he had ever fought meant nothing compared to what was about to happen next. If this story already has you gripped, hit that like button right now, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let's see how far this one travels. Stay until the end. You won't see the twist coming. The bakery on Callum Street had no sign worth reading. The paint above the door had blistered and curled until the letters were suggestions more than words, and the iron window grates were the color of old blood, where the rust had set in deep. Roman Viscari stood on the sidewalk in front of it at 11 in the morning with his collar up and his hands in his coat pockets and felt absolutely nothing, which was how he felt about most things anymore. "This is the place?" he said. Marco, standing to his left, checked his phone. "Mrs. Elnabosh, 73. Runs it herself. She's 4 months behind." 4 months. Roman looked at the door. "Why are we here personally for 4 months?" Marco said nothing, which was the correct answer. They were there personally because Roman had needed to get out of the car and walk somewhere that wasn't the office or the penthouse or one of the 3 safe houses he rotated between when the paranoia got loud enough to hear. They were there because he had woken up at 3 in the morning again with the particular silence that had no name, the one that had lived in his chest since Lyra. They were there because his consigliere, Adrian Kroll, had politely suggested that Roman was becoming difficult to work with, and that perhaps some field visits would help him recalibrate. And Roman had agreed with just enough self-awareness to know that Adrian was managing him, which he hated, and had gone anyway. He pushed the door open. The smell hit him before anything else. Warm bread and something with cinnamon, and underneath that, the particular sweetness of fruit preserves cooking down. It was the kind of smell that made people remember things they hadn't thought about in years. Roman didn't let it do that to him. He had spent a long time learning not to let smells and sounds do that. The woman behind the counter was small and bent at the shoulder, white-haired, with the careful movements of someone whose hands hurt, but who refused to acknowledge it. She looked at Roman and at Marco, and at the 2 men who had followed them inside and did not change her expression in any detectable way. "Mr. Vescari," she said. Her voice was steady. Most people's voices weren't when they said his name. "Mrs. Bosch." Roman rested his hands on the glass case. Inside, the pastries were arranged with precision, not the careless stacking of a place that didn't care, but the deliberate order of someone who took pride in small things. "You know why I'm here?" "I have the first installment." She reached under the counter and produced a manila envelope. "I'll have the rest by the end of the month. My supplier raised prices. It's been a difficult season." Roman picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. He was watching her face, which was the face of someone who had been frightened many times and had arrived, somewhere in the middle of her life, at a place beyond it. Not brave, exactly. Just worn through to something quieter on the other side of fear. "What's above the bakery?" he said. A pause. Barely a pause, a half a second, maybe less. But Roman caught it because catching pauses was one of the things he did. "My apartment," she said. "I live upstairs." "Just you?" "Just me." Roman nodded slowly. He put the envelope in his coat pocket. He looked around the bakery, at the old photographs on the walls, at the wooden chairs that didn't match, at the single round table near the window where a coffee cup sat with a thin skin of milk cooling on the surface. 2 coffee cups, he noticed, one near the chair, one on the counter. He would have let it go. That was the thing he thought about later. He would have let it go and walked out and never come back except to send a collector. He was already turning toward the door. Then he heard it. Laughter from above. 2 voices, both children, overlapping. Not the polite laughter of children who know adults are nearby and are moderating themselves, but the full, wild laughter of children who feel completely safe. And beneath it, a woman's voice saying something he couldn't make out, and then laughing too. And the sound of it moved through Roman's chest like something with a physical edge. He stopped walking. He stood very still. Marco said, "Boss?" Roman held up one hand without turning around. He was listening to the voice the way a man listens to something that might be a hallucination. with the particular suspended attention of someone who is afraid to confirm what he already knows. It had been 5 years. Voices changed in 5 years. Voices blurred and faded, and the mind rebuilt them out of grief into shapes that weren't accurate anymore. But that laugh was accurate. He moved through the door at the back of the counter before Mrs. Bosch could stop him. She said his name, said it with a sharpness that surprised him, an authority that didn't belong in the voice of an old woman behind a pastry case. And he ignored her, took the narrow stairs 2 at a time, Marco scrambling behind him. The apartment door at the top was unlocked. He pushed it open and stood in the doorway, and what he saw rearranged something fundamental in the architecture of his understanding of the last 5 years. Lyra Ashcroft was standing at a kitchen table with her back to him, flour on her forearms to the elbow and dusted across the dark fabric of her shirt, and she was leaning over 2 children who were seated at the table doing something with dough that had gone considerably off course and become more of a small catastrophe than a baking project. The children were laughing. She was laughing. One of the children, a boy, Roman registered without knowing how he registered it, looked up at him first, and the laughter stopped. The boy had gray eyes, not dark brown, not hazel, not anything that required a second look. Gray, unmistakably, the particular pale gray that Roman had seen in photographs of himself as a child, that he saw in the mirror every morning. The girl looked up next. Same eyes. Lyra turned around. For a moment nobody spoke, nobody moved. The only sound in the apartment was the hiss of something on the stove and the distant noise of the street below and Roman's own pulse, which had become very loud and very slow. Lyra's face did several things in very rapid succession. It went through shock and then through something that wasn't quite relief, and then landed, hard and final, on something that Roman recognized as the particular terror of someone who has been running for a very long time and has just heard the footsteps catch up. "Roman," she said. Her voice was different, lower. The 5 years were in it. "Lyra," he said. He had imagined this moment, had imagined it thousands of times, in the particular obsessive way that grief manufactures and remakes scenarios. And in every version of it, he had known what he would say. He had rehearsed whole speeches. He had found her and lost her in his head so many times that the emotional vocabulary of the reunion had been worn smooth from overuse. Standing in the doorway of that flour-covered kitchen, looking at her face and at the 2 gray-eyed children, he had nothing. She grabbed both children by the hand. "Don't," he said. She ran. Not toward him, away from the table, away from the kitchen, through a door at the far side of the apartment. He heard her feet on the stairs, going up, not down, which meant the roof, and he was moving before the thought finished forming, across the kitchen with Marco right behind him, through the door and up the narrow stairs, wooden, old, groaning under his weight. And he hit the roof door with his shoulder and burst out into the cold gray morning. She was already at the far edge of the roof, both children pressed against her, one on each side. She had a bag. When had she grabbed a bag? He looked back at the door, calculating. She'd had maybe 15 seconds on him. The bag had been ready. The bag had been packed, or near enough to pack that grabbing it had been automatic. A movement practiced, a movement built into her life above the bakery like a fire escape drill. She had been ready to run. She had always been ready to run. "Lyra." He stopped walking. He put his hands out at his sides, palms open. Marco stopped behind him. Roman turned and cut him a look, and Marco retreated 2 steps. "Don't. Please." "Stay where you are," she said. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone managing their own panic by compressing it into command. "Don't come any closer." "There's nowhere to go. I'll find somewhere." "You always do." He said it without bitterness. It came out more like grief than anything else. "You've been finding somewhere for 5 years. Her jaw was tight. She was looking at him the way you look at a man whose intentions you cannot trust and whose power you cannot overcome, calculating, controlled, already 3 moves ahead. This was something new in her. The Lyra he had known had not looked at him that way. The Lyra he had known had looked at him the way people look at something they want badly and are afraid to damage. She had been soft in ways she tried to hide, and he had loved the softness and the hiding both. This woman was not soft. This woman had built something hard over the last 5 years, layer by layer, and he was looking at the exterior of it now, and understanding slowly what it meant that she had built it. "The children," he said. He kept his voice very even. He needed to keep his voice even. "Are they mine?" A pause. "Don't," she said. "It's a yes or no question." "Nothing about this is a yes or no question." "Their eyes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The children were watching him with the particular attentiveness of children who understand that something large is happening and have learned to go very quiet when large things happen. The boy, Roman could not stop looking at the boy, had one hand gripping the strap of his mother's bag and was not crying. He was watching Roman with those gray eyes with an expression that Roman could not immediately categorize, something careful and watchful and not afraid in the way Roman would have expected. "Yes," Lyra said finally. The word came out like it cost her something. "They're yours." Roman felt the roof under his feet in a new way. He felt the cold air in his lungs in a new way. He felt 5 years rearranging themselves around a new center of gravity. Everything that had meant something, meaning something different now. Every decision made in isolation recontextualized by the existence of two gray-eyed 5-year-olds standing on a rooftop above Callum Street. "What are their names?" he said. Her expression shifted. She hadn't expected him to ask that. She'd expected something else, a demand, a threat, something that fit the version of him she'd been carrying in her head. "Eli," she said, "and Cora." Eli, Cora. He said the names to himself without making a sound. He tried them out in the interior of his head and felt them land somewhere permanent. "Why did you run?" he said. 5 years ago. Why did you run?" "You know why." "I don't. I have spent 5 years not knowing why. I need you to tell me." Her jaw worked. She looked at him. He watched something move behind her eyes. The calculation of how much to say, how much to trust, whether to trust anything at all. "I was shown a document," she said. "Your signature. Ordering my elimination. You'd found out about the pregnancy." She said it the way you say things you've said to yourself so many times they've lost their texture. Just information now, flat and hard. "I had 48 hours. The silence that followed had weight. "I never wrote that document," Roman said. "I saw it." "I don't care what you saw. I never wrote it. I never issued that order. I had no idea you were pregnant. I didn't know about any of it." His voice had stayed even right up until the last sentence, and then the evenness cracked slightly. Not much, but enough. "I spent 6 months looking for you before I understood you had chosen to disappear. I spent 2 years after that paying people to find you. Every private investigator I hired went cold. Every lead. Every trace." He stopped. He rebalanced. "Someone didn't want me to find you." She stared at him. "Someone inside my organization," he said. He watched her process this. He watched the version of events she had been living inside for 5 years encounter information that did not fit it, and he watched the terrible thing that happens when a structure you have built your life on begins to show the first fissures. "You're lying," she said. It was less certain than it should have been. "Think about it," he said. "Think about who showed you the document. Think about who had access to my signature. Think about who knew about the pregnancy. Because I didn't, which means someone told them. And if someone told them and didn't tell me, then someone was running a separate game inside my house." He could see it happening behind her eyes, the revision beginning, the awful, slow-moving revision of 5 years. "Roman," she said. Her voice had changed. Then the skylight behind him exploded. He registered the sound before the impact, the sharp, definitive crack of safety glass shattering, then the hot sting of a fragment across his left cheek, then Marco's shout and the staggered 2 seconds it took for his mind to catch up to what was happening. He turned. Marco was on the ground, clutching his shoulder. A second shot hit the rooftop 3 inches from Roman's foot and kicked up a divot of tar and gravel. Sniper. High angle. East. Roman moved without thinking. He crossed the roof in 5 strides and put himself between Lyra and the eastern elevation and felt the near pass of a third shot as heat along his right arm. "Get down," he said. He had his weapon out. He had Lyra by the arm. He was pushing her toward the roof door, her and both children, The children who had gone silent in the way of children who have understood that silence is the correct response to danger. Eli, the boy, stumbled on the threshold and Roman caught him, one hand under the boy's arm, the motion automatic and immediate, and for half a second he was holding his son for the first time, and the only thing between them and the person trying to kill them was Roman's own body. He got them through the door. He got the door shut. He put his back against it and heard the shot hit the metal skin of it from the outside and felt the vibration come up through his shoulder blades. In the stairwell, in the dark, Lyra was pressed against the wall with Cora in her arms. Eli was standing next to her watching Roman, that same careful, watchful expression, those same gray eyes. "Are you hit?" Roman said. "No." She looked at his arm. "You are." He looked down. His sleeve was dark and wet from the elbow down. The third shot had caught more than heat. "It's not deep," he said, which was possibly true and possibly not, but was what needed to be said. From below, he could hear Mrs. Bosch moving in the bakery. A door opening, the particular pattern of footsteps of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has known for a long time what they would do when this moment arrived. Roman looked at Lyra. Lyra looked at Roman. 5 years of silence and absence and grief and fury and the rewriting of history compressed into the narrow space of that dark stairwell, and underneath all of it, the two children. And underneath the children, the question that Roman had not yet asked and that Lyra had not yet answered, and that was going to force them toward each other whether they chose it or not. Because someone had tried to kill them both just now, which meant someone knew he had found her, which meant the 48 hours she'd been given 5 years ago had never really expired. It meant the order, real or forged, was still active, and whoever had issued it was still watching. Roman pressed his back against the door. He listened to the silence on the roof. He looked at Lyra and said very quietly, "We need to move, and you need to decide, right now, whether you trust me." She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at him on the roof, measuring, calculating, terrified, and controlled at once. Then Eli spoke. First words Roman had heard from him. Small voice even, a child's voice that was somehow already carrying something steady underneath it. "Mom," the boy said. "He got between us and the shot." Lyra looked at her son, looked at Roman. "I know," she said. She reached out and took Roman's uninjured arm. "Show us the way out," she said. They came out through the bakery's back delivery door into an alley that smelled like wet cardboard and diesel and something rotting in a dumpster 10 feet to the left. Roman went first, weapon up, sweeping right then left, the injured arm doing what he told it to do for now, and filing a complaint he would deal with later. The bleeding had slowed or he'd gone numb to it. Either way, it didn't matter. Marco was on his feet, shoulder wound packed with his own jacket, face the color of old concrete. He had his phone out. "Don't," Roman said. Marco looked at him. "No calls, no location, nothing digital." Roman said it low and flat. "Whoever tracked us here had advance information. That means someone in the network is feeding positions." Marco put the phone in his pocket without arguing. He was smart enough to understand what that meant and scared enough to comply. Lyra came through the door behind Roman with Cora on her hip and Eli's hand in hers. Mrs. Bosch came last, moving with a speed that didn't match her bent shoulders, a canvas bag over one arm and a set of keys in her hand. She pulled the door shut and locked it from the outside like she was closing up at the end of an ordinary business day. "My car is 2 blocks north," she said. "Blue Volvo. 14 years old and unremarkable." "You're not coming," Roman said. "I wasn't asking," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the same composure she'd had behind the counter when he'd walked in, as if nothing about this situation exceeded what she had already planned for. "Later," Lyra said to him quietly. "Later I'll explain. Right now just move." They moved. The Volvo was where the old woman said it would be, parked between a delivery truck and a streetlight that had been dark long enough for someone to have tagged the base of it with paint. Roman got Marco into the back seat. Lyra put both children in beside him and climbed in after. Roman took the passenger seat. Mrs. Bosch drove. She drove without consulting anyone, which meant she already knew where she was going. Roman watched the mirrors. He watched every car that appeared in them and held his attention on each one for the 3 or 4 seconds required to establish whether it was following a pattern or just existing. After 12 blocks, he was reasonably certain they were clean. After 20, he was less certain, which was worse than being certain of the bad thing. "Where are we going?" he said. "Somewhere safe," Mrs. Bosch said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have that's worth giving right now." Roman turned in the seat and looked at Lyra. She was holding Cora against her chest, her chin resting on top of the girl's head, her eyes on the window. Her jaw was set. She was running something through her mind. He could see the particular quality of her stillness, which was not calm, but computation. "The document," he said. "The one they showed you. Who showed you?" She didn't look away from the window. "A man. He came to the apartment we shared. You were away. He said he worked for you. I'd seen him before, in the background, at the edges of things. He had your letterhead, your signature." "Did he give a name?" "Doyle. He said his name was Doyle." Roman filed that. "What did he look like?" "Thin, late 40s, something wrong with his left eye. It didn't track quite right, like it was glass or close to glass." Roman said nothing for a moment. He turned back to face the windshield. Marco, from the back seat, very quietly. "Boss?" Roman said, "I know." "Who is it?" Lyra said. "A man named Doyle worked directly for Adrian for 3 years," Roman said. "He was Adrian's personal logistics coordinator. He died in a car accident 14 months ago." He paused. "Or was reported to have died." The silence in the car had a texture. "Who's Adrian?" Lyra said. "My consigliere. The man who has managed my organization since my father died." Roman watched the road. "The man who suggested I come on a collection run this morning to, quote, recalibrate, unquote." Lyra turned from the window and looked at him fully for the first time since the stairwell. He didn't look away. "He knew you'd find me," she said. "He knew I'd come to this neighborhood. He's been watching me. For how long, I don't know." Roman's voice was even, but his right hand had closed on his knee with enough pressure that the knuckles had gone pale. "I need to make some calls that I can't make on any device Adrian's network has touched. I need to get to a clean line." "I have one," Mrs. Bosch said from the front. "At the house." Roman looked at her. "Why do you have a clean line?" She drove for a moment before answering. "Because I have been waiting," she said, "for a very long time, for this day to arrive, and I prepared for it accordingly." He wanted to push her further and understood that pushing would get him less than waiting, so he watched the road and let the question stand unanswered for now. They drove for 40 minutes, out of the dense inner streets, through a corridor of industrial blocks, and then into a residential grid that was neither wealthy nor desperate, the kind of neighborhood that minded its own business, because its own business was the only business it could afford to care about. The house Mrs. Bosch stopped at was narrow and deep, set back from the street behind a fence overgrown enough to provide cover without looking deliberately concealed. The driveway gate was rusted in a way that was cosmetic. Roman noticed the hinges were new. Inside the house it was warm and spare, everything functional, nothing decorative except for a row of framed photographs on the hallway wall that Roman moved past too quickly to examine. Mrs. Bosch took the children to a back room, a room that had toys in it, he noticed, as the door swung open, toys and 2 small beds with clean sheets, and Lyra went with them. Roman stood in the kitchen with Marco and waited. Marco's shoulder had stopped bleeding. The wound needed more than a jacket and pressure, but it would hold. "Talk," Marco said. "Adrian organized this," Roman said. "He sent us to that bakery knowing I'd hear something or see something that would lead me to her. He's been sitting on her location and waiting for the right moment to use it." "Use it how?" "I don't know yet." Roman pulled out his phone, turned it off completely, removed the battery. "But the sniper wasn't waiting for me to find her and walk out. The sniper fired while we were on the roof together. He wanted both of us." "Both of you," Marco said slowly. "Or all 4 of us." Marco sat down in one of the kitchen chairs. He processed this with the specific slowness of someone who has handled difficult information for years and knows better than to rush it. "The children," Marco said. "Yes. Why would Adrian want— I don't know yet. And until I know, We don't say anything about the children to anyone. Roman said it with a quietness that was more emphatic than volume would have been. To anyone. Marco. Understood. Lyra came back into the kitchen. She had washed the flour from her arms and changed her shirt. She had clothes here, which meant this had been her real home for some time, not just a hiding place she used. She poured water from a jug on the counter into 2 glasses and set one in front of Marco without being asked. She stood with her own glass and looked at Roman. "They're settled," she said. "Mrs. Bosch is with them." She paused. "She's good with them. She has been since the beginning." "How did you end up here, Bob?" Roman said. "With her specifically." Lyra set down the glass. "When Doyle came and told me I had 48 hours, I panicked. I had no money, no documents, no plan. I had your name and your face and the understanding that both of those things were going to get me killed." She said this without self-pity. "I went to a shelter first. They connected me to a legal aid organization. One of the women there knew Elna." She glanced toward the hallway. She said there was an old woman who sometimes helped people disappear quietly, that she was discreet and didn't ask questions and didn't have a phone she used for anything traceable. "She didn't ask questions," Roman said. "She asked one. She asked if the man I was running from was the kind of man who hurt people who didn't deserve it." Lyra looked at him steadily. "I said I didn't know. She said that was the most honest answer she'd heard in years, and she gave me the room above the bakery." The back door opened, and Mrs. Bosch came in. She went to the kitchen counter, opened a drawer, and removed a phone. An older model, a brick of a thing with no internet capability, the kind used specifically because it was below the threshold of systems that monitored network traffic. She handed it to Roman. "The numbers you need," she said, "are already in it." Roman turned the phone over in his hands. He looked at her. "Who are you?" he said. "Actually." She met his gaze with the composure of someone who has answered this question in her own head many thousands of times and arrived at a version of it she can live with. "My name is Elna Bosch," she said. 32 years ago, before you were old enough to understand what your father was, I was your mother's closest friend." She said it the same way she said everything, simply, without performance. "When your mother died, I made her a promise. I didn't know what form keeping it would take. I didn't know it would take this form." She glanced at the hallway. "I'm glad it did." Roman stood very still. "You knew my mother," he said. "I loved your mother," she said. "There's a difference." He didn't have a response to that. He turned away and looked at the phone and began to think about who to call and in what order, and how much of what he'd learned in the last 2 hours could be verified without exposing Lyra's location to any channel Adrian might monitor. Lyra was watching him. "You said every investigator you hired went cold," she said. "Every lead." "Every one." "How many people knew you were looking?" "My whole inner circle." Adrian coordinated the search. He said it and then stopped because the sentence completed itself in a way he didn't need to speak aloud. Lyra completed it anyway. "He ran the search to make sure it failed," she said. "Yes." "He kept us separated." "Yes." "For 5 years." The flatness had left her voice. Something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but contained both the way a container holds 2 liquids that don't mix, was coming into it. "He took 5 years from us." "And he's still running something," Roman said. "The timing of today isn't coincidence. He wanted me to find you today, in that specific place, in a way that could end with both of us dead and make it look like a rival hit. If the sniper had connected, my organization passes to Adrian in the transition. He consolidates. Whatever he's been building toward, he accelerates." "But why now, Marco said. 5 years of patience, and now—" "The twins turned 6 in 2 weeks, Lyra said. Her voice had gone very quiet. Both men looked at her. "I don't know how it works," she said. "I don't know all of it. But 8 months ago I started receiving notices. Legal documents, medical requests. Someone was trying to establish genetic information about the children through institutions. Their pediatrician's office was contacted. The school records were queried." She set down the glass. "I pulled them out of school. I started keeping them closer. I thought it was about you. I thought you'd found us and were building a legal custody case. I didn't know it was something else." Roman said, "What kind of genetic information?" The requests were framed as insurance inquiries, but they weren't specific about health history. They were specific about chromosomal data, biometric markers. She looked at him. That's not a medical question. That's an identification question. Roman felt something go cold and very clear in the back of his mind. He had not thought about his father's assets in years, not the legitimate ones, and certainly not the others. The ones his father had sequestered in the last 18 months of his life, during a period when Roman had believed the old man was simply becoming paranoid and erratic with age. His father had muttered in his last months about safeguards, about contingencies, about things that couldn't be stolen because they weren't in any place a person could reach. "My father," Roman said slowly. Mrs. Bosch, still standing by the counter, said quietly, "Yes." "What do you know about it?" "I know that your father, in the last year of his life, understood that the people around him were not loyal to him. I know that he was afraid, not for himself, but for what he'd built and for what it could become in the wrong hands. I know that he made a decision about how to protect certain things." She paused. "And I know that he did not tell Adrian." "But Adrian found out," Roman said. "Adrian found out enough to know the children matter, not enough to know why." "And the why?" Roman said. It wasn't quite a question. Mrs. Bosch looked at him for a long moment. "Your father encoded access to a sequestered fortune, the final, hidden consolidation of everything he pulled back from the organization before his death, through biometric data. Genetic markers specific to his bloodline. It was intended for you, but when he died and the transition was difficult and you were barely holding the organization together, the access protocols remained dormant." She said this very carefully, as if she had held the information a long time and was measuring each word as she released it. "The children carry his genetic line, both of them. They are the secondary keys. The failsafe he built in because he didn't know whether you'd survive the transition." The kitchen was very quiet. "How much?" Roman said. "Enough to rewrite the structure of the underworld on this coast," she said. "Enough that every family currently operating in a 3-state radius would want to control it, and the quickest way to control it is to control the children." Roman turned and looked at Lyra. Lyra's face had gone through something while Mrs. Bosch was speaking and had arrived on the other side of it at a place that was absolutely still. "They've been hunting my children," she said. "Yes. The syndicates, the genetic queries. It was coordinated. Adrian has been selling access," Roman said. "He's been building a coalition. Multiple families, all fed the same information, all competing for the same asset. He was working it out as he spoke, the shape of it coming clear. That's why the sniper fired when he did. Not to execute me, but to create a vacuum. If I'm dead before I know about the children, the legal succession goes to Adrian. He becomes the gateway. And if the children are in his hands," Marco said, "he controls access to everything my father hid." Lyra said nothing. She was looking at her hands on the table. Roman's phone, the clean one, buzzed. He looked at the screen. A number he recognized. One of 2 men he had kept outside the organization's formal structure specifically because he didn't entirely trust his own house. He answered. "Tell me," he said. The voice on the other end was measured, unhurried in the way of men who have trained themselves to deliver bad news without apology. "You asked me 6 months ago to keep a secondary watch on Adrian's external contacts. Off book. Nothing in the network." "I remember." "He met with representatives of 3 families last Thursday, Calorie, Morn, and the Sestina group, all in the same 24-hour window. I only just confirmed the 3rd meeting." "What was the exchange?" "A delivery schedule. Something being moved within the next 2 weeks." A pause. "The documentation referenced 2 biological subjects. Minors." Roman's hand tightened on the phone. "Where's Adrian now?" he said. "That's why I'm calling. He's not at the office. Not at the residence. His personal security detail went dark 3 hours ago." Another pause. Roman. "His people picked up a tail on a blue Volvo 40 minutes ago on the Drescher overpass. They lost it at the industrial block transition, but they have a general grid." Roman was already moving toward the hallway. "Lyra," he said. She was out of the chair before he finished the syllable. He didn't know if she'd heard the call or just read his body or simply had the same instincts now that 5 years of running had installed in her. Either way, she was moving, toward the back room, toward the children. Mrs. Bosch was already in the doorway. "There's another car," the old woman said. "In the garage. Keys are on the hook inside the door. It's registered to a name that doesn't connect to this address." She said it without hurry. "There's a second route through the service road behind the fence. It exits 2 streets north." Roman looked at her. "You've been ready for this," he said. "From the beginning." "Your mother asked me to keep a promise," she said. "I've had a long time to think about what keeping it would require." He held her gaze for 1 second. Then Cora appeared in the hallway door in her socks and a sweater, rubbing one eye with her fist, half awake, blinking at the light and at the adults and at Roman in particular with a frank, uncomplicated curiosity that tore something open in the middle of his chest. "Are we going somewhere again?" she said. Lyra came from behind and scooped her up, and the motion was so fluid, so ingrained, that it was clearly one they'd done 1,000 times in the dark. Middle of the night, pack the bag, pick up the child, move. Roman watched his daughter being carried and heard his son's footsteps coming down the hall behind her and thought about 5 years and thought about Adrian and thought about his father's voice saying the word safeguard in a room he hadn't understood at the time. He thought about what it meant that Adrian had arranged this morning, that he'd sent Roman to that street, that he'd had a sniper positioned and ready. It meant Adrian had not been certain the sniper would succeed. It meant Adrian had prepared for the alternate outcome. It meant somewhere, right now, Adrian Kroll was not running. He was waiting. He had a secondary plan, had always had a secondary plan. And the secondary plan was already in motion, and Roman was moving through it without yet being able to see its edges. He took the keys from the hook inside the garage door. He looked at the second car. Older, anonymous, the right kind of invisible. Eli was standing beside him. The boy had gotten his shoes on by himself in the dark. He had his mother's bag over one shoulder, too large for him, the strap across his chest. He was looking at Roman with those gray eyes that were Roman's own eyes, in a face that was not Roman's face. And he said nothing, just waited, prepared, already understanding at 5 years old that waiting with readiness was sometimes the only thing available. Roman reached down and took the bag off the boy's shoulder. "I've got it," he said. Eli looked at him for a moment. "Okay," the boy said. They got in the car. The garage door opened onto the service road, and the service road was dark and empty, and Roman drove north without lights for the first 100 yards. And when he turned onto the street, he turned away from the direction Adrian's people had last tracked the Volvo and drove at exactly the speed limit, because the speed limit was invisible and speed was not. Lyra was in the passenger seat. The children were in the back with Marco. Nobody spoke for 6 blocks. Then Lyra said, very quietly, so only Roman could hear, "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Adrian doesn't know about," Roman said. "Somewhere I've never told anyone about." She looked at him. "Does that place exist?" "I built it 2 years ago," he said, "when I started to understand that the walls inside my own house weren't solid." He kept his eyes on the road. "I didn't know what I was building it for. I thought it was paranoia." "It wasn't paranoia," she said. "No," he said. "It wasn't." They drove. The city thinned around them, the dense blocks giving way to wider streets, and then to the kind of infrastructure that exists between things, warehouses and rail sidings, and the backs of businesses that face other streets. The sky had gone the color of dirty pewter, and the first edge of evening was beginning to sharpen the light. In the back seat, Cora had fallen asleep against Marco's uninjured arm, her mouth slightly open, entirely trusting in the boneless way of small children. Eli was awake, watching the passing city through the window with an attention that was too old for his face. Roman's phone, the clean one, buzzed again. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, local prefix. He answered, a voice he recognized immediately, even though he had not heard it in years, even though the last time he'd heard it had been at a hospital bedside while machines made sounds and a man's breathing was audible in the pauses between sentences. The voice of a man who was supposed to be dead. "Roman," the voice said, "it's time you understood what your father actually built, and why Adrian Kroll has been willing to wait a decade to destroy it." Roman's hands were steady on the wheel. His voice, when it came, was steady too. "You have 30 seconds, he said, before I hang up and assume this is a trap." "Then listen fast," the voice said, "because the trap isn't on this phone. The trap is the child Adrian already has." Roman hit the brake. The car stopped in the middle of an empty block. In the back seat, Marco had gone rigid. Lyra had turned fully to face Roman, reading his face, and what she read there made the color leave hers. "Which child?" Roman said. But even as the words came out, he was already turning, already looking into the back seat, already counting, and the count came up wrong. Had been wrong since the last turn. Had been wrong since the block before that. When the service road met the street and the garage door had swung shut behind them, and in the confusion of moving in the dark with a wounded man and a half-asleep child and a boy carrying a bag that was too large for him, one child in the back seat, Cora, asleep against Marco's arm. Eli was gone. Roman was out of the car before it fully stopped. He had the back door open and was looking at the seat where Eli had been sitting, and the seat was empty in the specific way that something becomes more real the longer you stare at it. Cora was still against Marco's arm, still asleep. The space beside her was just space, a crease in the seat fabric, the ghost of warmth already going cold. "When?" Roman said. Marco was staring at the empty seat. His face was the face of a man who has just understood that something happened on his watch that cannot be undone by explanation. He was there when we turned onto the service road. I saw him get in. He had the bag." "The bag is gone too," Roman said. It was. He checked the footwell, the seat, under the seat, nothing. Lyra had come around the car. She was standing behind Roman, and he could hear her breathing. Not panicked, not yet, but at the threshold of it, controlled by will alone. He turned and looked at her, and what he saw in her face was the look of a woman who has spent 5 years developing contingency plans and has just encountered the one scenario none of the contingencies covered. "He didn't fall out," she said. "It came out very flat. He didn't wander. He's 5, not 2. He doesn't wander." "Someone took him at the garage," Roman said, "in the transition. The door came down behind us and there was a window. 10, 15 seconds where nobody had eyes on everyone." "I had him," Lyra said. "I had his hand until I got in the car." "You had Cora," Roman said. Gently, because it was true and it wasn't blame, and he needed her to hear the difference. "You had Cora in your arms. I took the bag. Marco got in." "The door," Marco said quietly. "Someone was on the other side of the garage door." Roman looked at him. "They'd already breached the service road," Marco said. "Before we came out. They were staged and waiting, and they took him in the dark during the transition." He stopped. "It was coordinated. This whole day was coordinated. The roof, the sniper, the car chase, the safe house. None of it was improvised. It was a funnel." Roman understood this in the way you understand something that you have already half known and simply had not allowed yourself to complete. Adrian had not sent him to Callum Street this morning to have him killed. Or not primarily. The sniper had been real, but the sniper had also been containable. A man of Roman's experience and resources, caught on a rooftop, was not guaranteed to die. Adrian would have modeled that. Adrian would have planned for survival. The funnel was the plan. Drive Roman toward Lyra. Drive Lyra out of hiding. Move her to the safe house she'd been using for 5 years, the one she trusted, the one that was already compromised. Create chaos in the transition. Take the child. One child. The genetic key worked with one. The other was insurance. He looked at Cora still sleeping in the back seat, and the word insurance sat in his stomach like something swallowed wrong. His phone buzzed. The unknown number again. He answered. "Who are you?" Roman said. "My name is Garrett Finch," the voice said. "I worked for your father for 11 years. I was his financial architect. I built a sequestration structure that Adrian has spent a decade trying to crack." A pause. "I also faked my own death 14 months ago when Adrian's people came for me. I've been operating at a distance since." "Doyle's death," Roman said. "You coordinated it." "Doyle came to me first. He'd had a crisis of conscience. Not enough of one to come forward publicly, but enough to make contact. He told me what he knew about the children, about the sequestration, about what Adrian was planning." Finch's voice was precise, the voice of a man who lives in systems and numbers. I helped him disappear. Adrian found him anyway. The car accident was real, in the sense that a car was involved. So Adrian knows the children are the key. He's known for 8 months. The genetic queries were his. He's been trying to confirm which child carries the primary marker and which carries the secondary. Your father encoded it so that one child holds the access sequence and the other holds the confirmation protocol. Without both, the sequence is incomplete. He needs both of them, Roman said. He needs both of them simultaneously. One alone is useless. A pause that was almost too carefully placed, which means taking Eli was not the endgame. It was leverage. He wants you to bring him Cora. Roman turned away from the car. He walked 3 steps down the empty block and stopped with his back to everyone and stood very still for approximately 4 seconds, and then he turned back around. "Where is Eli?" he said. "I don't know the precise location, but I know Adrian's infrastructure in this city. I know where he stages operations of this sensitivity." Finch paused. "There's an industrial facility on the east waterfront. Decommissioned steel processing owned through 4 layers of shell companies, the last of which traces to a holding entity your father set up in 2009, and Adrian inherited operational control of without, I believe, understanding he'd inherited it. I used it as a documentation cache. Adrian repurposed it 18 months ago. Send me the address." "I'm sending it to the phone you're using now, but Roman..." A beat. "You need to understand something before you go in there. Adrian has had 24 hours to prepare that facility. He has the Calorie and Morn representatives on site as witnesses. This was designed to be a transfer event, a demonstration to the other families of his control. You going in with force will accelerate his timeline, not interrupt it." "I'm going in with force," Roman said. "I know," Finch said. "I'm going in with you." Roman said nothing for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Because I spent 11 years building something your father intended to be the foundation of a different kind of future. Something legitimate. Something clean. And I watched Adrian corrupt every piece of it he could reach. And I have been hiding in the margins for 14 months, watching him position to corrupt the rest." The precision in Finch's voice had an edge under it now, ground down from something older and more personal than professional obligation. "Your father trusted me. The least I can do is make sure what he built ends up in the right hands." Roman ended the call. He walked back to the car. Lyra was standing beside it, Cora now awake and in her arms, the girl's face still soft with sleep and confused by the stopped car and the empty street and the quality of stillness in all the adults around her. Lyra was looking at Roman's face. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. The sequestration, the genetic keys, the transfer event, the facility. He told her the way he told her everything now, directly, without softening, because she had spent 5 years making life-or-death decisions on incomplete information, and she deserved complete information even when it was the worst kind. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He used Eli to get Cora," she said. "Yes." "He needs them together." "Yes." She looked down at Cora in her arms. Cora was picking at a loose thread on Lyra's collar, unaware, her small face still flushed with the warmth of sleep. "So if we go in for Eli," Lyra said, "we're walking Cora into the facility." "I know. That's the trap." "Yes." "And you want to go anyway." "I'm going anyway," he said. "The question is what we do with Cora first." Lyra looked at him. Her expression was the most complicated thing he had ever seen on a human face. Love and rage and calculation, and the specific exhaustion of someone who has been the only protection between her children and the world for 5 years, and is being asked to divide that protection and trust someone else with half of it. "Marco," she said, without looking away from Roman. "Yeah," Marco said. "If I give Cora to you, right now, and you take her somewhere and I don't know where and Roman doesn't know where, and you stay with her until it's over." She stopped. "Can you do that?" Marco looked at his shoulder. He looked at the little girl. He looked at Lyra. "Yes," he said. She held Cora tighter for a second. Cora looked up at her. "Mama?" "You're going with Marco for a little while," Lyra said. She kept her voice entirely ordinary, entirely calm. The voice of a woman who has had to make the world seem safe in moments when it absolutely was not. It's an adventure. Cora considered this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old evaluating all available data. "Does Marco have snacks?" she said. Marco reached into his jacket pocket and produced, improbably, a crumpled packet of crackers. Cora extended her arms toward him. Lyra handed her over. She held on for exactly 1 second longer than the handoff required, and then she let go and took 1 step back, and Roman watched her do it and understood that it was the hardest thing he had ever seen anyone do. He reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. Just for a second. She didn't pull away. They watched Marco buckle Cora into the back seat of the car, start it, and drive north. They watched until the taillights were gone. The address came through on the clean phone. Roman looked at it. Finch had included a structural schematic, old architectural files, the kind that existed in municipal records and meant nothing until they meant everything. Roman studied it for 90 seconds, building the interior of the facility in his head the way he had built the interiors of 100 contested spaces over the years, mapping entry points and choke points and the places where a man with a rifle would naturally position himself. "There's a way in through the waterfront access," he said to Lyra. "Service entrance. The eastern side of the building is the processing floor. That's where Adrian will stage the demonstration. The ceiling height, the sight lines, it's theater. He'll want the Kaleri and Morn people to see everything clearly. Eli will be on the processing floor," Lyra said, "or secured adjacent. Close enough to present, far enough to protect if something goes wrong. We go in from the waterfront." "You don't go in at all," he said. She looked at him. "Lyra, my son is in that building," she said. The flatness was back, the compressed quality, and underneath it something that had no compression left, something that had burned down to its base element. "I have spent 5 years keeping those children alive by myself, in hiding, with no resources and no backup, and no one who knew the whole truth. I carried them. I delivered them in a hospital under a name that wasn't mine. I have been the only wall between them and everything that wanted to reach them." She stopped. Her jaw was set. "You don't get to tell me to wait outside." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I know. I'm not telling you to wait outside." He paused. "I'm telling you that when we're inside, you follow my read on the room. If I say stop, you stop. If I say down, you go down immediately without asking why. Can you do that?" "Can you?" she said. Something that might have been the ghost of a different kind of moment moved across his face and was gone. "Fair," he said. They moved. The waterfront was 20 minutes on foot through the industrial corridor, which was the right kind of movement. No car, no digital trace, no traffic camera pattern to establish. Roman moved with his weapon out and low, Lyra a step to his right and behind, both of them using the natural shadow of the buildings and the particular darkness of a waterfront district where the streetlights had been broken long enough that nobody had bothered to report them anymore. Finch was waiting at the service entrance. He was older than Roman had expected. Early 60s, slight, with the precise movements of someone who has spent a career in offices and has compensated for physical inconsequence with careful positioning. He was wearing dark clothing that didn't fit him perfectly and holding a tablet showing real-time thermal imaging of the building's interior. 3 heat signatures on the processing floor, Finch said without preamble. 1 small. That's your son. He's stationary, center floor. He's been stationary for 40 minutes, which suggests restraint but not distress. He showed Roman the tablet. 7 additional signatures distributed across the floor space, 2 clustered near the south wall. Those are the Kaleri representatives. 2 more east side, that's Morn. Adrian and his security are the remaining 3, near the boy. Roman studied the display. Exits? North roll door, south personnel door, the waterfront access we're standing at, and an upper-level catwalk that connects to the old supervisory offices. The offices have a fire ladder to the roof. Snipers on the roof? 1. South-facing, he's watching the approach road. Not the waterfront. Adrian doesn't expect waterfront approach. He expects you to come through the road or not at all. He believes you don't know the location. He'll figure out you talk to me." "Yes," Finch said. "He will." He said it without visible distress. "That's a consequence I've made my peace with." Roman looked at him. "Let's go," he said. The waterfront door was old and heavy, and its lock had been cut. "Finch's work," he said 2 hours earlier. It opened onto a service corridor that smelled like rust and standing water and machine oil, the particular smell of industry that has stopped but has not yet been cleaned of itself. The corridor ran east and then opened, at its far end, through a steel fire door into the processing floor. Roman put his eye to the gap in the doorframe before he opened it. The processing floor was large enough that the far walls were in partial shadow despite the industrial lighting Adrian's people had rigged, portable floods. 3 of them, positioned to illuminate the center of the space and leave the periphery dark, which was theater and also tactically stupid because it meant anyone in the dark could see everyone in the light. Eli was in the center of the floor. He was sitting on a metal chair, his wrists zip-tied in front of him, his face very still. He was not crying. Roman looked at his son's face across the width of the processing floor and felt something that had no clean name, something that was equal parts fury and grief, and something else, something that was not an emotion he had had before and did not have a word for, something that was simply the specific pain of a father seeing his child restrained. Eli was looking straight ahead, not at Adrian, who was standing 10 feet from him with his back to the waterfront wall, not at the cavalry men near the south wall or the Morn contingent to the east. Straight ahead, at nothing, with his mother's jaw set in his 5-year-old face and his grandfather's eyes absolutely steady. Roman looked at Adrian. Adrian Kroll was 51 years old and looked like a man who had spent 51 years convincing rooms that he was the most reasonable person in them. He was in a dark suit, no tie, hands clasped in front of him, and he was speaking to the assembled families with the measured cadence of someone making a business presentation. Roman couldn't hear the words through the door, but he could read the body language, the slight forward lean, the open gestures, the absolute confidence of a man who believes the situation is entirely controlled. Roman felt Lyra's breath on his shoulder. He turned his head and looked at her. She had seen Eli. He knew she had seen him because her entire body had gone through a change he could see and feel. A kind of violent stillness, the stillness of something that has been compressed past its safe limit and is now at a state of potential energy so high that the slightest release will not be a small thing. "He's okay," Roman said. Against her ear, barely a sound. She nodded once. "When I go through that door," he said, "you go left and stay with the wall, and you don't move toward him until I tell you. The moment this room knows we're here, every weapon in it comes out. You understand?" Another nod. "I mean it." "I know you mean it," she said. He opened the door, he stepped through it, and he kept walking, weapon up, straight across the processing floor toward the center of the light. He walked at the pace of a man who is not surprised to be where he is and intends to remain there. And he watched Adrian see him at the 12-step mark and watched what happened to Adrian's face in that moment. Not fear, which was interesting, but something more complex, the expression of a man who has had a plan and has now encountered a variable he needs to rapidly reclassify. "Roman," Adrian said. "Adrian," Roman said. He stopped 8 feet from the chair. He was between Adrian and Eli. He did not look at Eli. Looking at his son would spend attention he needed to be spending on the room. He felt Eli behind him, the way you feel a fire at your back. The particular awareness of something that matters enormously that you must absolutely not look at. The cavalry men had hands inside their jackets. The Morn contingent had separated. One of them was moving laterally, positioning. Adrian's security, both of them, were watching Roman with the specific attention of professionals deciding whether they'd been given a clearance to act. Adrian looked past Roman toward the door Roman had come through. "Where's the girl?" he said. "Safe," Roman said. "Where?" "Somewhere you'll never find her." Roman let that sit. "I know what they are to you. I know the sequestration. I know about my father's fortune and the biometric access and everything you've built the last 10 years around getting your hands on it." He watched Adrian's face. "I also know that without both children present and cooperative, you have nothing. So you have a restrained 5-year-old boy and a room full of witnesses and a plan that just became significantly more complicated. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. "You've been talking to Finch," he said, "among others. Finch is a frightened old man who's been hiding for 14 months. Finch is a frightened old man who built the system you've been trying to crack for a decade," Roman said. "There's a difference." Adrian's composure had not cracked. This was the thing about Adrian that Roman had always respected and now recognized as what it actually was. Not steadiness, but the practiced absence of any interior life that could be read. Adrian had spent 30 years building a face that showed exactly what he chose and nothing else. "You can't take the boy and walk out of here," Adrian said. "You're in a room with 9 armed men." "I've been in rooms with 9 armed men before." "Not with a child in the center of them." This was true. Roman felt the truth of it. He stood very still and let the full shape of the situation come clear. The sight lines, the positions, the particular geometry of armed men in a large room with a child at the center, which was a geometry designed specifically to prevent the kind of action that Roman's instincts were pointing him toward. "Let me offer you something different," Adrian said. He stepped forward slightly. "Tell me where Cora is. Let the transfer proceed. Your son goes home with you tonight, unharmed, with everything you need to rebuild the organization on the foundation your father actually built." He spread his hands. "You get your family. I get the access. The families get paid. Everybody lives." "Except my father," Roman said. Adrian didn't blink. "My father didn't die of a heart attack," Roman said. He said it without heat. He had suspected this for years and had not spoken it aloud until now, and speaking it aloud in this room, in front of witnesses, was a deliberate act. "You killed him." The room was very quiet. "He was going to dissolve everything," Adrian said. And here, for the first and only time, something came into his voice that was not the presentation voice, not the boardroom voice, something older and raw. He was going to take everything we'd built, everything we'd bled for, and hand it to lawyers and walk away. For what? For legitimacy? For a clean name? His jaw had tightened. He didn't have the right to make that choice alone. "It was his empire," Roman said. "It was our empire. I built it with him. I was there from the first corner we took, the first judge we paid, the first family we displaced. He didn't build it by himself, and he didn't have the right to destroy it by himself." Adrian stopped. He recomposed. "I made a decision, I stand by it, and I built something with the years that followed that your father, whatever his intentions, never could have built." Roman was quiet. "You murdered my father," he said. "And then you ran his empire in his name, and you spent 10 years positioning to steal the one thing he managed to hide from you." He paused. "And you used me to do it. You used my name and my reputation and every war I fought, thinking I was building something for a family I didn't know I had. Every brutal thing I did in the last 5 years, I did under your direction, and it built your position, not mine." The room was listening, the Calorie men, the Morn contingent. They were listening. "You want to walk out of here with the boy," Adrian said, and the business voice was back, deliberate, the emotion sealed back under the surface. "The girl is the price of that. Make your choice, Roman. You're not leaving with both." Roman said nothing for a moment. Then behind him, Eli's voice. Small, even, the same steadiness that had been there on the rooftop. "Dad," Eli said. Roman had not been called that before. Not once. Not by either of them. He felt the word in the back of his sternum like a struck note. He turned around and looked at his son, and Eli was looking at him, zip-tied hands in his lap, face calm in the way of someone who has decided that calm is the only thing left that belongs entirely to them. "There's a woman behind you on the catwalk," Eli said. "She's been there since before you came in." Roman spun. The catwalk above the processing floor, visible in the upper shadows. A figure. Female. Moving not toward the center of the floor, but toward the supervisory office access at the far end. And something about the movement, the angle, the unhurried purpose of it, made the back of Roman's neck contract. He looked at Adrian. Adrian was looking at the catwalk. And for the first time tonight, for the first real time, Adrian's composure had a crack in it, something uncertain, something that was almost, not quite but almost, alarm. "Who is that?" Roman said. That, said a voice from the south personnel door, which had opened without anyone in the room apparently noticing, is a problem none of us planned for. Finch walked in through the south door. He held the tablet at his side. He looked at the catwalk. She's been in the building for 6 hours, he said. He looked at Roman with an expression that was entirely outside the parameters of what Roman had expected from him. An expression of someone delivering news that is both worse and more complicated than anything previously disclosed. She was here before Adrian's people arrived. The figure on the catwalk had reached the supervisory office door and opened it. She paused in the doorway. She looked down at the processing floor, at Adrian, at Roman, at Eli in the chair at the center of everything. And then she looked directly at Roman, and he recognized her face. He had not seen it in 11 years. He had believed, with the certainty of a funeral and a gravestone and a death certificate signed by 2 doctors, that he would never see it again. He had built his entire understanding of who he was and why he was it around the fact of her absence. His mother looked down at him from the catwalk with the face of a woman who has been hiding for longer than Roman had been hiding anything, and she said, across the vast open space of the processing floor, in a voice that carried absolutely clearly in the silence, "Adrian, you should have made sure I was dead." Adrian took 1 step backward. It was the first involuntary movement Roman had seen him make. Roman's mind was reorganizing itself around this new fact with the particular violence of understanding that everything had been constructed on a false foundation, that the walls and floor and ceiling of the last 11 years were not what he had believed them to be, that his mother's death and his father's death and Lyra's disappearance and the empire he'd built and the war he'd fought to hold it were all, every piece of them, moves in a game someone else had been playing longer and with more information than he had ever been given. He turned back to Adrian. Adrian's gun was out. It was pointing not at Roman, but at Eli, and every other weapon in the room had come out in the same second, and the geometry of the space had shifted into the one configuration from which there was no clean exit, no acceptable play, no version of the next 10 seconds that Roman could build in his head that ended without catastrophe. Roman stood between his son and the man with the gun and felt, with absolute clarity, that he had run out of moves. Except one. He put his own weapon on the floor. He straightened up. He put his hands at his sides and looked at Adrian across the 8 feet of space between them and said, quietly enough that only Adrian could hear, "You want the access. You want the fortune. You want everything my father built." He paused. "I'll give it to you, all of it, tonight. Every account, every code, every structure Finch built. I'll hand you the keys to everything my father ever touched." His voice was even, and he meant every word of it, which was the most dangerous thing about it. "And in exchange, you release my son, you walk away from my family, and you never look in our direction again." Adrian studied him. "You'd give up the empire," Adrian said. "I'm giving up an empire built on my father's murder and my consigliere's betrayal and 5 years of not knowing I had children," Roman said. "Yes," without hesitation. A long pause. "And if I say no," Adrian said, "then we find out," Roman said quietly, "what my mother has been planning for 11 years. Adrian glanced up at the catwalk. The supervisory office door was open and empty. His mother was gone. And from somewhere above them, in the dark of the upper structure where the catwalk met the roof access, a sound began. Low, mechanical, the sound of something large and old and deliberately triggered beginning to move. Roman had 3 seconds to understand what was happening before the processing floor's emergency suppression system, dormant for 11 years and evidently serviced by someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, discharged. The lights went out. In the dark, Roman moved toward his son. The dark was total for exactly 4 seconds. Then the emergency suppression system finished its discharge cycle and the backup lighting kicked in. Red, low, the color of something living and not quite healthy, casting the processing floor in a light that made everyone in it look like they were already bleeding. The suppression had been dry chemical, not water, and the air was thick with it, a fine white particulate that caught the red light and turned the whole floor into something you could barely see across. Roman had covered the 8 feet to Eli's chair in the first 2 seconds of darkness by memory and by the particular animal navigation of someone who does not need his eyes to move towards something that matters. He had the zip tie between Eli's wrists cut with the blade from his ankle before the red lights came up. He had his son by the arm and was pulling him toward the waterfront wall before the coughing started. Eli coughing from the chemical suppression, Roman's hand flat against the boy's back, steering him. "Don't run," Roman said against his ear. "Walk. Fast. Don't run." Running in a room full of blinded, coughing, armed men was how you got shot by someone who fired at movement. Walking fast with your head down was how you got to a wall. They got to the wall. Roman pressed Eli against it and put himself between the boy and the floor and looked back into the red-lit haze. He could make out shapes, men moving, the sound of Adrian's voice issuing commands he couldn't fully hear through the suppression noise and the coughing. A shot fired, somewhere south, and then someone shouted and the shot wasn't answered, which meant it had been a mistake, a nervous finger, not a coordinated response. Lyra materialized out of the haze from the left. She hit the wall beside Roman and grabbed Eli with both hands and made a sound he had never heard from her. Barely a sound, barely a breath. That was simply the sound a person makes when they have gotten their hands on something they thought they might not get their hands on again. Eli pressed into her. His face, over her shoulder, was still that particular controlled stillness, but something in it had released slightly, just around the eyes. "Waterfront door," Roman said. "Someone's between us and it," Lyra said. "I saw him on the way over, left side." Roman looked. Through the chemical haze 10 feet from the waterfront door. A shape. Stationary. Waiting. Adrian's security, the smarter of the two, who had read the room correctly and positioned himself at the only clean exit instead of moving through the chaos. "Give me 10 seconds, Roman said. He went left along the wall, low, using the haze. The suppression was settling but hadn't cleared, and the red backup lights were doing more to create shadows than to reveal anything. He could hear the cavalrymen somewhere south, hear them communicating in the clipped half-sentences of people who are reverting to their own operational language under stress. He could hear the Morn contingent moving, which meant they were separating from the Kaleri people, which meant the coalition Adrian had assembled was already fracturing under pressure, which was the only piece of good news in the room. He came up on Adrian's man from behind and to the right, out of the man's peripheral field. And he didn't use the gun because the gun was loud, and loud was coordinating information for everyone else in the room. He used his arm and the wall and the man's own momentum, and it was ugly and it was brief, and the man went down and stayed down. Roman turned back. Lyra was already moving, Eli's hand in hers staying with the wall. Roman met them at the waterfront door, got it open, pushed them through. The cold air off the water hit like a physical thing after the chemical heat of the processing floor. Eli coughed twice, hard, and Lyra pulled him further from the door, and Roman came through last and pulled the door shut behind him. They were on the waterfront service dock. The water was black and moving, the lights of the far shore making long reflections that broke and reformed in the current. The dock was empty. 50 yards north, the service road met the dock, and beyond that, the industrial corridor they'd come through. Finch was not with them. Roman looked back at the door. "He went up," Lyra said. "When the lights went out, I saw him go toward the catwalk stairs." "My mother," Roman said. "I don't know." He stood for a second in the cold air with water sound and his son's coughing and Lyra's breathing and the muffled, deteriorating chaos inside the building. Voices, movement, the sound of the Kaleri and Morn people losing the shape of the situation they'd come to witness. He had the clean phone. He had his weapon. He had his son. He did not have Adrian. And he understood, with the specific clarity of a man whose instincts have been right enough times to trust, that leaving Adrian inside a building he could exit through multiple routes while Roman ran was not a solution. It was a delay. Adrian had the resources and the infrastructure and the decade of preparation, and the 3 allied families, and what had just happened inside the steel mill was a disruption, not a defeat. Given 48 hours, Adrian would reorganize. Given a week, he would rebuild. Given any runway at all, he would come back at the children from a direction Roman hadn't anticipated, and the next attempt would not be designed to acquire them. The next attempt would be designed to eliminate the complication. "I need you to take him and run," Roman said to Lyra. She looked at him. "North on the service road, there's a parking structure 3 blocks up. Level 2, space 47. There's a car there, key under the left rear wheel well, registered clean. You take it, and you go to Marco and Cora. You don't come back. Roman, I'm not finished. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and removed a folded document. Paper, actual paper, not digital, the kind of thing you carry because some information is too important to trust to a device. He put it in her hand. Those are account numbers and access codes. Finch's work, copied from the original documentation. They don't give access to my father's sequestration. Nothing does without the children, but they give access to operating capital. Enough to relocate, establish, and stay gone for a long time. He paused. If I don't come back. She didn't look at the document. She was looking at him. You've had this on you all day, she said. I had it on me when I walked into the bakery this morning, he said. I carry contingencies. For me? I've been carrying contingencies for you for 5 years. The dock was quiet around them. Eli was looking up at Roman with those steady gray eyes, and Roman made himself not look away from Lyra because this was the conversation that needed to happen, and it needed to happen now while there was still time to have it. I came back for you, he said. The search, every investigator, every lead. It wasn't professional, and it wasn't tactical. I needed you back because nothing I built meant anything without... He stopped. He started again. You disappeared, and I spent 5 years making sure nothing in my life was important enough to hurt me like that again. I built walls around everything. I burned some of it down on purpose just so it couldn't be taken. He paused. It didn't work. Turns out it doesn't work. She reached up and put her hand against the left side of his face. Quickly, briefly, the way you touch something to confirm it's real. Come back, she said. Working on it, he said. She took Eli's hand. Eli looked at Roman. Roman looked at his son. Go with your mother, Roman said. Okay, Eli said. Then, after a beat, don't lose. Roman almost smiled. That's the plan. He watched them go. North on the dock, Lyra moving fast, Eli matching her stride, neither of them looking back because looking back was a luxury, and Lyra had taught her children to leave without looking back. He watched until they were past the end of the dock and into the dark of the service road, and gone. He turned around and went back through the waterfront door. The processing floor had stabilized in the way that violent situations stabilize when they reach a temporary equilibrium. The chemical haze had settled to a knee-high layer, and the red backup lights had been supplemented by someone producing a flashlight, maybe two. The Calorie and Morn representatives were together near the south wall now, not fragmented, which meant they'd made a decision. The Morn man Roman recognized, older, heavy-set, cautious in the specific way of men who have survived by never being the first to commit, was on a phone. Adrian was standing near the center of the floor. He had his weapon holstered. He was looking upward, toward the catwalk. He was looking at something Roman couldn't yet see, and the quality of his attention, the tightness of it, the animal focus, told Roman the something was significant. Roman walked out of the shadows near the waterfront wall and into the red light, and Adrian heard his footsteps and turned. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the width of the processing floor. The boy is gone, Roman said. I know, Adrian said. I'm still here. I see that. Adrian's eyes moved across Roman, assessing, reading the absence of a weapon in his hand. You put it down, earlier. That surprised me. Surprising you was the goal. You came back, Adrian said. That surprised me more. I came back because I'm not finished, Roman said. He walked forward, crossing the floor, and Adrian watched him come without reaching for his weapon, which was information. I came back because the boy being gone doesn't fix anything. The children are always going to be targets as long as you're alive and functional. The families are always going to see them as a key to something they want. Nothing I do to protect them matters if the architecture you've built around them stays standing. So you came to tear it down, Adrian said. I came to give you one last version of the offer, Roman said. He stopped 6 feet away. Walk away from the families. Walk away from the access protocols. Disappear with what you have. And you have enough, Adrian. You've skimmed enough over 10 years that you could live well for 3 lifetimes. Walk away, and I let you walk. Adrian studied him. "And if I don't," Adrian said, "then we're going to find out how this ends between us directly." Roman held his gaze. No weapons, no rooms full of people. Just the two of us and what we actually are. Adrian was quiet for a moment. "You know I'm not going to walk," he said. "You've known me for 15 years. You know exactly what I'm going to say." "I know," Roman said. "But I wanted to give you the choice, because it matters to me that I gave you the choice." Adrian shook his head, not in refusal exactly, but in something that was almost something like respect, the specific, reluctant respect of one certain kind of man for another. "Your father said something like that," Adrian said, "before the end." Something moved through Roman's body that was not fear and not anger, but was the particular cold resolution that comes when the last thing that might have held you back has been removed. "I know," Roman said. Above them, on the catwalk, a door slammed. Both men looked up. Finch appeared at the catwalk railing. His face was cut. Something had caught him across the cheekbone, blood dark in the red light. He was looking down at the floor with the expression of a man who has just come from something and has information he needs to deliver before he falls over. "She's not up here," Finch called down. His voice was strained. "She was. Someone was waiting for her up here. Adrian's people, a third man I didn't see in the thermal imaging. They had a—" He stopped. He put one hand on the railing. "She's hurt. She went through the roof access. I don't know—" "Which direction on the roof?" Roman said. "South." Roman was moving before Finch finished the word. He went for the catwalk stairs, hit them at speed, took them 3 at a time. The catwalk swayed under his weight. Old steel, bolted but not welded, the whole structure vibrating with each step. He could hear Adrian moving below him, hear the Callery and Morn men reacting to the new motion, hear Finch's breathing above. He hit the supervisory office door and went through. The office was a gutted space. Filing cabinet frames still bolted to the walls, the desks long removed, the floor scattered with old paper and broken safety glass from a window that had come in from the outside. There was blood on the floor near the far wall, not a large amount, but fresh. There was a fire door at the far end, hanging open onto a metal ladder that went up and through a hatch in the roof. He went up. The roof of the steel mill was flat and vast, and the night was above it, and the waterfront light came up from the water to the east, and the storm that had been threatening all afternoon had arrived while they were inside, was arriving now in the specific way of industrial district storms. Not gradual, not building, just suddenly, massively present. Wind and the first heavy drops and the smell of metal and wet stone. His mother was at the south edge of the roof. She was on her feet, which was what mattered first. She was on her feet, and she had one hand pressed against her left side, and she was looking at the man between her and Roman, Adrian's third man, larger than the two on the floor, with the particular build and stillness of someone contracted specifically for situations that required a specific kind of resolution. Roman's mother looked at Roman. In 11 years, in his head, she had been the person she was the last time he saw her. The hospital version, the version attached to machines, the version whose absence had been the original wound that everything else had grown from. The woman on this roof was not that woman. She was older, harder, with the self-possessed stillness of someone who has spent 11 years becoming exactly what circumstances required. She looked at her son, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything because the man between them was moving. He was fast. Roman had time to register that he was fast before the man was on him, and the fight was not clean, and it was not brief, and it was conducted on a wet roof in a rainstorm with wind that made every surface unreliable. And Roman took a hit to the ribs that bent him wrong and had to spend 2 seconds he didn't have getting his breathing back before he could do anything productive with his hands. The man was trained and heavy and fought with the efficiency of someone who doesn't need it to be complicated, who has made a professional study of the quickest way to end things. Roman was none of those things, and instead had the particular advantage of a man who has everything to lose, which is not nothing, which is in fact the most functional fuel available in a situation like this. He ended it at the roof edge. Not gracefully. With his hands and his weight and the man's own forward momentum and a piece of rusted pipe that was simply there, on the roof, the way things are simply there when you need them badly enough. The man went down and stayed down. Roman straightened up. His ribs sent a message. He filed it. He crossed the roof to his mother. She had taken her hand from her side to check the wound. A knife, he saw, shallow but long, the kind of wound that bleeds impressively without being immediately fatal. She pressed her hand back against it with the focused calm of someone who has assessed the information and decided it is manageable. "You're not dead," Roman said. "Evidently," she said. 11 years, he said. "I know. I watched them bury you." "I know." She looked at him directly. "I'm sorry. I need you to understand that there was no version of what I needed to do that could be done with you knowing I was alive. Adrian was watching you. He was always watching you. If he'd known I had survived, he would have come after you." "He would have come after you," she said, "to get to me. You were 20 years old and barely holding the organization, and I was the leverage. I was the thing that could be used." She stopped. "So I stopped existing." "And Elna Bosch," Roman said, "has known since the beginning. She was the only person who did." His mother's voice had the texture of someone who has held a secret for so long that releasing it feels like setting down something very heavy. "She kept Lyra safe for me when I asked her to. When I understood what Adrian was building toward and understood that the children would be his endgame, I asked Elna to bring Lyra there, to keep her in my sight. You've been watching over them," Roman said, "as much as I could, from far enough away that Adrian didn't see me." She looked at him. Her eyes were his father's eyes, dark, steady, the eyes he'd seen in photographs of his father as a young man. "I've been watching over all of you. From below, on the stairwell, footsteps. Multiple sets. Coming fast." Roman turned toward the roof hatch. Adrian came through it. He came through alone, which was wrong. His security was down, and the Calorie and Morn men were not the kind to follow anyone up a fire ladder into a rainstorm, which meant Adrian had made a decision that this ended between specific people, and he'd come to enforce that decision himself. He had his weapon out. He looked at Roman. He looked at Roman's mother. He looked at the man down near the roof edge and made the necessary calculation and put his weapon on Roman. "The families are leaving," he said. He said it without inflection. Morn called his people. Kaleri followed, a single child and a disrupted handover, and a federal tip that apparently went out 3 months ago and has been sitting in a processing queue. He stopped. He looked at Lyra's name on the building like he was seeing it for the first time. He looked back at Roman. "You've been dismantling this for longer than today." 6 months, Roman said, "since I started understanding what was wrong inside my own house." "The tip to the federal task force," Adrian said. "Was Lyra's," Roman said. 3 months ago. She walked into a field office under a protected identity program and sat down with a task force supervisor and gave them everything she'd compiled in 5 years of watching my organization from the outside. Everything she could access, every name she recognized. He paused. "She's been doing the work I should have done." Adrian was very still. "They're coming tonight," Roman said. "The task force. The tip activated when Lyra sent a confirmation signal 3 hours ago, when she was certain she had the children out." He watched Adrian's face. "You have maybe 20 minutes before this building has federal coverage on every exit." The rain was heavier now. The roof was wet and the wind was moving the water sideways, and Adrian's suit was soaked through, and none of it seemed to register on him. He was a man standing inside his own ending and doing the math on it with the same precision he'd brought to everything else. "You're giving me the information," Adrian said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I want you to make a choice," Roman said. "The same way you made a choice 11 years ago with my father, except this time you know what's coming either way. And I want you to have to decide consciously." He took one step forward. "You can run. You have 20 minutes and the money you've skimmed and whatever identity you've prepared, and maybe you get somewhere the task force can't reach, and you live out your life as someone else. Or you point that weapon at me and we end this on this roof, and whichever one of us walks away from it clean." "Clean," Adrian said. He said it with something in his voice that was not quite contempt and not quite grief. "As clean as either of us gets," Roman said. The rain came down between them. Adrian looked at Roman's mother. "Did he tell you," Adrian said to her, "what your husband intended to do, what he was building toward?" The clean future, the legitimate businesses, the... His voice had something in it now, something that Roman recognized as the closest thing to genuine emotion he had ever heard from Adrian Kroll. Not anger, but a wound, old and unhealed and never adequately acknowledged. He was going to throw it away, everything we built together. He decided, unilaterally, that it was over, that we were done. He didn't ask, he didn't consult, he just decided. Adrian's jaw was tight. I gave my entire life to what we built together, and he was going to erase it because he got sentimental about his family. He got sentimental about his family, Roman's mother said quietly, because his family was the only thing that was ever actually real. The silence that followed was the length of several raindrops hitting the roof surface. Adrian looked at Roman. He made his choice. He came forward with the weapon still up, and Roman moved left and felt the shot go past his right ear, close enough to hear the air displaced by it. And then they were inside each other's reach, and the weapon was no longer the relevant instrument. What followed was not the clean action of men who have trained for moments like this. It was the desperate, ugly, grinding reality of two people who are trying to survive by any means available, on a wet roof in a rainstorm, with everything that had ever mattered between them. Roman's ribs screamed. He ignored them. Adrian was stronger than Roman had anticipated. A decade behind a desk had not made him soft in the way that desks usually make men soft, because Adrian had always prepared for contingencies, including this contingency, the one where it came down to bodies. He fought with the methodical economy of someone who has visualized this exact situation and has made decisions in advance about what he will and won't allow himself to feel during it. What he hadn't planned for was Roman's mother. She came from behind and to the left, not with strength she didn't have, not with the wound in her side that was taking more from her than she was showing, but with the specific resource of someone who has waited 11 years for a single moment and has arrived at it with absolutely nothing left to lose. She bought Roman 3 seconds, which was enough. Roman ended it. He stood over Adrian on the wet roof and breathed. The rain came down on both of them. He looked at the man who had killed his father, who had stolen his family, who had spent a decade turning Roman's own hands into the instrument of his own betrayal, and he felt nothing that was satisfying, nothing that closed anything, only the specific, exhausted absence of a fight that is over. His mother was sitting on the roof with her back against the ventilation housing, her hand pressed against her side again, her eyes on Roman. From somewhere below, from the road, from the waterfront approach, from the south, the sound of vehicles. Multiple. The particular sound of coordinated arrival. The task force. Roman stood up straight. His ribs made their case again, and he acknowledged them this time. He looked at his mother. She was watching him with an expression that was measuring something, measuring him against the memory of the 20-year-old she'd left, checking the distance, trying to map where he'd gone in the years between. "It's over," she said. "Not yet," Roman said. He reached down and picked up Adrian's weapon and his own from the roof surface and looked at the roof hatch and thought about the Kaleri and Morn men who were already gone, already dissolving back into the city, already making their own contingency calculations. He thought about Finch, somewhere in the building, and about the federal agents who were going to come through every door in the next 5 minutes. He thought about Lyra and Eli and Cora, moving north through the city in a clean car. He thought about what came next, not the next 5 minutes, after. He looked at his mother. "Can you walk?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Then walk," he said, "because what I'm about to do is going to require you to be somewhere else, and I need you to trust me on that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Your father trusted me on things that required trust," she said. "I know," Roman said. "I'm asking for the same." She stood. She was steady on her feet, or steady enough. She looked at her son one more time, with the look of a woman who has spent 11 years rehearsing this moment and has found that the real thing is both less and more than the rehearsal. And then she went to the fire ladder at the north edge of the roof and began to descend. Roman waited until she was out of sight. Then he put both weapons down on the roof and turned toward the roof hatch and waited for the sound of boots on the catwalk stairs, which came 30 seconds later, which was exactly what he'd been standing there for. The first federal agent through the hatch came up weapon first and found Roman Viscari standing in the rain with his hands open at his sides and nothing in them, looking at the agent with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is prepared to be held to it. "My name is Roman Vescari," he said. "I have information about the criminal network operating under my organization's infrastructure for the past decade. I have documentation. I have financial records." He paused. "I'm prepared to give you everything." The agent stared at him. More agents came through the hatch behind the first. Roman stood in the rain with his hands open and waited. And in the particular silence between one thing ending and another beginning, he thought about a ring he had been carrying for 5 years in his coat pocket, and about a rooftop in a different part of the city where a woman had run with her children in the dark, and about what it might look like to build something on a foundation that was actually true. The agent said, "You understand that anything you say—" "I understand," Roman said. The federal holding room smelled like burnt coffee and the particular staleness of a building where the ventilation had been inadequate for decades, and nobody had filed a complaint worth acting on. Roman sat at the table with his wrists resting on the surface in front of him and watched the agent across from him open a second folder and understood, from the thickness of the folders that had been coming through the door for the last 4 hours, that this was going to be a long night. He was not wrong. They went through everything. The agent, her name was Carver, mid-40s, with the specific tiredness of someone who has worked financial crime long enough to have lost the capacity for surprise and retained only a functional, professional skepticism, went through it with the thoroughness of someone who knows that the first conversation sets the architecture for everything that follows and is not willing to let the architecture be sloppy. She had 2 junior agents flanking her who took notes, and occasionally left the room and came back with more folders. Roman answered every question. He answered them in the same order they were asked, without embellishment, without evasion, without the particular lawyerly hedging that Carver had clearly been expecting, because he had not come into this building to negotiate a position. He had come in to dismantle something, and dismantling required specificity. He gave them Adrian's financial network. He gave them the shell company structure that Finch had built and Adrian had corrupted. He gave them the names of the judges, the names of the municipal officials, the names of the 3 family representatives who had been in the steel mill tonight and had driven away before the task force arrived. He gave them dates and amounts and routing numbers from memory because he had spent 6 months memorizing the architecture of his own house in preparation for exactly this kind of accounting. At 2 in the morning, Carver set down her pen. "You understand," she said, "that the cooperation you're offering doesn't automatically translate to immunity. The scope of what you've described, your own participation—" "I'm not asking for immunity," Roman said. She looked at him. "I'm asking for a framework," he said, "a structured cooperation agreement that allows me to remain accessible for testimony and documentation while the case is built. I understand there will be consequences. I'm not here to avoid consequences. I'm here to make sure that when the consequences land, they land on the full architecture, not just the visible parts of it." Carver studied him for a long moment. "You're giving up the empire," she said. It was almost exactly what Adrian had said on the roof, but it came out differently. Not disbelief, but the professional assessment of a woman trying to identify what she was actually being offered. "I'm giving up an empire that was never actually mine," Roman said. "It was my father's. And before it was his, it was something else, and before that something else again. I've been the custodian of someone else's war for 15 years. He paused. "I'm done being the custodian." She picked up her pen again. They went until 4 in the morning. When they finally put him in a temporary holding cell to wait for the formal processing, Roman sat on the bench with his back against the wall and closed his eyes and felt, for the first time in what might have been years, the particular quality of a mind that has nothing left to manage. No operation running, no position to hold, no loyalty calculation to run against every interaction, nothing to maintain. It was not comfortable exactly, but it was clean in a way that nothing had been clean for a very long time. He slept for 3 hours, which was the first full 3 hours of uninterrupted sleep he could precisely remember. In the morning, his lawyer arrived. Not the organization's lawyer. The organization's lawyer had already been contacted by Carver's team and was, as of 6 a.m., navigating a conflict of interest that would keep him occupied for weeks. This was a different lawyer, a woman Roman had retained privately 8 months ago and had not told anyone about, who had spent those 8 months preparing for the specific legal situation that had now materialized. Her name was Ose. She was calm and precise, and she had read every document Roman had given her over those 8 months with the focused attention of someone building a structure that needed to hold weight. And when she sat across from him in the consultation room and looked at him, her expression was not surprised. "You're intact," she said. "More or less." "The cooperation agreement framework is viable," she said. "I've reviewed what they're working with, and I've reviewed what you're offering, and there's a workable structure here. It won't be clean, and it won't be fast, and there will be conditions you won't like." "I know. But you stay out," she said. "The children's assets, your father's sequestered fortune, that's going to require a separate legal track. The biometric access complicates the estate question significantly." "The fortune goes into a trust," Roman said. "The children don't touch it until they're adults, and they can make an informed choice about what to do with it. In the meantime, the income from the legitimate assets, the ones that can be documented as clean, goes to a community development fund operating in the neighborhoods the organization taxed for 30 years. Ose wrote something. "That's going to reduce what's available to you significantly," she said. "I know what I need, and what I need is not very much," Roman said. She looked up from her notepad. "Where did that come from?" she said. It was not an unfriendly question. Roman thought about it honestly. "Someone reminded me," he said, "that the only things that were ever actually real were the things I almost lost." Ose nodded once and went back to her notepad, and they worked through the morning. The formal cooperation agreement took 11 days to structure and sign. 11 days during which Roman was held in a federal facility that was not a prison cell, but was not freedom either. A supervised residence, essentially, a building where he could work with Ose and meet with Carver's team and go through the documentation that the task force was using to dismantle the network piece by piece. 11 days during which he did not see Lyra or the children because their location had been placed under a separate protective protocol, and contact had been restricted while the threat assessment was ongoing. He was given a phone with approved contacts on day 3. He called Marco first because Marco was the contact he needed for operational information, and also because Marco had been the one sitting in a federal waiting room for 36 hours before being cleared as a cooperating witness, and Roman owed him a conversation before anything else. Marco answered on the second ring. "You look terrible in a holding photo," Marco said. "They released it this morning. It's on 3 news sites." "How's the shoulder?" Roman said. "Functional? They fixed it properly this time." A pause. "Cora told the federal protection officer that his tie was the wrong color. He changed it." Roman was quiet for a second. "She's all right," Marco said. "Both of them. Lyra has them in a location I'm not supposed to describe, but which I can tell you has a working kitchen, because Eli apparently told the supervising agent that his mother makes better bread than anything they've been given, and the agent agreed." Another pause. "He's a good kid, Roman." "I know," Roman said. "He's got your face when you're working something out. It's unsettling." Roman almost laughed. It came out as something less than a laugh, but more than nothing. "She asked about you," Marco said. "Lyra, yesterday. She asked if I'd spoken to you and what your status was." He paused. "I told her you were fine. You are fine, right?" "Working on it," Roman said, the same thing he'd said to Eli on the dock. On day 7, the news broke nationally. The story was not the story Roman would have told. It was the story assembled from federal sources and unnamed informants and the particular narrative gravity of organized crime coverage, which tended toward the operatic and missed most of the texture of what actually happened inside these structures and why people stayed inside them. Roman watched some of it on the small television in the supervised residence and turned it off after 20 minutes, because the distance between the coverage and the reality was too large to sit with comfortably. On day 9, Finch came in for his own deposition. Roman saw him briefly in the hallway, heading in the opposite direction with Carver's team. Finch had a bandage on his cheek where the cut had been cleaned and closed. He looked older in the building's fluorescent light than he had looked on the waterfront. He stopped when he saw Roman. "The fortune," Roman said. He kept his voice low. "What my father built. Can it be unwound from the biometric access? Made accessible through conventional estate channels?" "Not entirely," Finch said. "The encoding is layered, but I can build a secondary access structure that routes the legitimate income without requiring the primary biometric sequence. It'll take time. He paused. I already started, actually, 8 months ago, when you first came to me. He looked at Roman steadily. I had the same idea you did. My father trusted you for a reason, Roman said. He trusted me because I told him the truth when it wasn't comfortable, Finch said. I'm telling you the same thing now. The children's legal situation is going to be complex, and the trust structure you're proposing is the right move, but it's going to take 2 years to properly establish. Plan for that. I'm planning for a lot of things that take time, Roman said. They went in opposite directions. On day 11, Roman signed the cooperation agreement. On day 12, the restriction on contact was lifted. Lyra called at 7 in the morning. He was awake. He had been awake since 5, which was roughly when he had started being unable to think about anything other than the phone call that was coming, and which he had no rehearsed speech for this time and did not want one. He answered. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who are located on either end of something very large and are taking a second to feel the full extent of it before they start talking. The news coverage is bad, she said. I know. They made you sound like a caricature. I know. You're not a caricature. I know that too, he said. Are you all right? I'm all right. A pause. Eli wants to know when he can see you. He asked every morning. The agents documented it. I think they found it charming. Another pause. Cora wants to know if you know how to make anything. She's been helping me bake, and she has opinions about who is and isn't allowed in the kitchen. I can make coffee, Roman said. That might be sufficient. A longer pause. Roman, yeah. I read the cooperation agreement summary. What you gave them. A beat. You gave them everything. Yes. You didn't have to give them that much. Osei could have structured it narrower. I know, he said. I didn't want it structured narrower. She was quiet. You actually want out, she said. Not a question. I have wanted out, he said carefully, since the morning I walked into a bakery on Callum Street and heard you laughing at something one of the children said. I wanted out before that, if I'm being honest. I've wanted out for longer than I've been willing to admit to anyone, including myself. He stopped. He started again. My father wanted out. He was wrong about how to do it. You can't just decide unilaterally. You can't just walk away from something that many people have built around you and expect it to stand on its own. But he was right about wanting it. You sound like him, she said quietly. Elna said you do. She said she heard it this morning on the coverage, and she called me and said that Roman sounds like his father did at the end. Roman was quiet for a moment. How is she? He said. Stubborn, Lyra said. She's been told to rest and has interpreted that to mean she can rest while giving me instructions about the bread-proofing schedule. And my mother, he said. A pause. She's here, Lyra said. He hadn't known that. He'd known his mother had gotten off the roof, had known it from the absence of any federal report of a second person apprehended at the scene, which meant she'd cleared the building before the task force got to the north exit. He hadn't known where she'd gone. She came to us on day 2, Lyra said. She knocked on the door of the protection facility and identified herself to the supervising agent and asked if she could come in. A beat. The agent checked with Carver. Carver cleared it. She's been here since. What is she? He stopped. He didn't know how to finish the sentence. She's been telling the children about their grandfather, Lyra said simply. What he was like when he was young, before everything. What he wanted. She sits with them after dinner, and she tells them things. A pause. Eli listens like he's memorizing it. Cora falls asleep halfway through, and your mother keeps going anyway. Roman put his hand over his eyes. Okay, he said after a moment. Okay. Come soon, Lyra said. Tomorrow, he said. Osei cleared tomorrow. Tomorrow, she said. He went the next morning with Osei and a federal escort that stayed outside at the protection facility's perimeter and gave them the privacy of a visit that was supervised in name only. He went through the door of the facility, and the first thing that happened was Cora appeared from around a corner at speed, and stopped 2 feet in front of him and looked up at him with the frank assessment of a child who has heard a great deal about a person and is now running a real-time comparison between the description and the reality. "You have a bruise," she said. His left cheekbone from the steel mill roof, the fragment from the shattered skylight. He'd forgotten about it. "I do," he said. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." She considered this. Then she held up both hands, the universal child request for being picked up, delivered with the unself-conscious authority of someone who has never had reason to doubt that the request would be fulfilled. He picked her up. She was heavier than he expected, which was not something he'd had any basis for expecting anything about, and she smelled like bread and something citrus. And she put one hand against his bruised cheek with a gentleness that was completely at odds with everything about how she'd arrived at this moment. And she looked at him very seriously and said, "Eli said you caught him when he fell on the roof." "He didn't fall," Roman said. "He stumbled. I caught him." "He said you were fast." "I was motivated," Roman said. She seemed to find this an acceptable answer. She put her head on his shoulder with the settledness of a person who has decided a thing and is done deliberating about it. Eli was in the kitchen doorway. He was watching Roman with those gray eyes and that expression that was going to be difficult for Roman to ever fully get used to. The expression of his own interiority reflected back at him in a face that was not his face, his own watchfulness and caution, and the particular quality of attention he brought to things that mattered, all of it operating in a 5-year-old boy who had been developing it without him for every day of those 5 years. "Hey," Roman said. "Hey," Eli said. "How's the wrist?" "The zip tie marks." "Fine." Eli looked at his wrist briefly and back up. "I knew you were coming. I heard her on the phone." "Yeah." "She smiled," Eli said. "After. She doesn't always smile like that." Roman didn't have a response that was adequate, so he didn't manufacture one. Lyra came from the back of the facility with Roman's mother beside her, and the specific image of those two women walking together. The woman he had loved, and the woman who had shaped him into a person capable of loving her, side by side, in conversation, having apparently spent 12 days building something between themselves in the protected space of a federal facility, was one that Roman was going to spend a long time processing and was not going to rush. Lyra looked at him. She looked at Cora on his shoulder and at Eli in the doorway and at Roman's face, and what moved across her expression was not simple. It had the complexity of everything they'd been through in it, the 5 years and the grief and the fury and the flower on her arms in the kitchen that morning that felt both like yesterday and like a different life entirely. It had the complexity of a woman who has made her own life out of almost nothing and is now standing in a room where someone is asking her to make it into something different and larger and less solitary, and who is deciding, consciously, in real time, whether she trusts that. She crossed the room. She didn't hug him. They were not there yet. They had not been there yet, and she was not a woman who moved faster than her own certainty. She stood in front of him and looked up at him and reached out and put her fingers briefly against the bruise on his cheek, in the same place Cora had touched it, and the echo of it did something he was not prepared for. "You need to eat," she said. "You look like you haven't eaten in 11 days." "I haven't eaten well in 11 days, he said. "There's bread," she said. "Come sit down." They sat at the facility's kitchen table, the 6 of them, Roman, Lyra, both children, Roman's mother, and Elna Bosch, who appeared from a back room walking with a cane she had apparently acquired, and who looked at Roman over the table with the specific expression of a woman who has been carrying a promise for 30 years and is feeling the weight of it lift. Roman looked back at her and thought about his mother's voice saying, "I loved your mother, there's a difference," and thought about the photographs on the hallway wall of the safe house that he'd passed too quickly to examine, and understood that there were things here that predated him and that he would need time to learn the full shape of. They ate bread and they drank coffee, and the children talked. Cora talked at volume about everything, and Eli talked selectively and precisely about specific things he'd observed during the 11 days in the facility, which included a detailed analysis of why the federal agents had been cycling through the same 3 sandwiches and what he thought they should have ordered instead, which made Lyra press her lips together against a smile and made Roman's mother laugh outright. A short, clear laugh that Roman had not heard in 11 years, and which he registered in the specific way you register the return of a sound you had decided was gone permanently. After the children were taken by Elna to the back room for what Elna called the afternoon program, and which appeared to consist of learning to make a specific kind of pastry that Elna had opinions about, Roman and Lyra and his mother sat at the table with the remnants of the bread between them. His mother looked at Roman. "Finch called me this morning," she said. "The secondary access structure. He says 18 months, not 2 years, if he can work without interruption." "He'll have what he needs," Roman said. "The community trust," she said. "The income distribution. It's the right thing." She said it simply, without sentimentality. "It's what your father wanted to build toward. He just didn't have the right mechanism." "He also didn't have 11 years to think about it," Roman said. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said. Not for the first time. She had said it the night before, on the phone. A conversation that had gone for 2 hours and covered things that neither of them had the words for yet, and both of them had attempted anyway. "I know what those years cost you. I know what you became inside them. I know that some of what you did cannot be undone by intent, regardless of how this ends." "I know that too," he said. And I'm going to do what I can do," he said, "which is what's in front of me, not what's behind." He paused. "I learned that from somewhere." She recognized the echo of something in it and did not push further. Lyra had been quiet through this exchange, her hands around her coffee cup, looking at the table. She looked up now. "The bakery," she said. Roman looked at her. "Mrs. Bosch's bakery," she said. "On Callum Street. The lease is in arrears, and the building owner has been approached by a developer." She set down the coffee cup. "I don't want it to close." Roman thought about the smell that had hit him when he walked through the door on Callum Street, the warmth and cinnamon, and something that made people remember things they hadn't thought about in years. He thought about the 2 coffee cups, one on the counter, one at the table. He thought about a woman who had kept a promise for 30 years in a building with blistered paint above the door. "Then it won't close," he said. "I want to expand it," she said. She said it in the particular way she said things she had been thinking about for a long time and had been waiting for the right moment to say, directly, without decoration, the way she did everything. "I've been baking for 5 years. I know what I'm doing. And there are 3 other neighborhoods in this city that had the same relationship with the organization that Callum Street had, places that were taxed and pressured and diminished for 30 years. I want to put a bakery in each of them." Roman looked at her. "With the community trust income," he said. "With the community trust income and my own work," she said. "I'm not asking for a gift. I'm asking for a foundation." "Those are different things," he said. "Yes," she said. "They are." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the document he'd put in her hand on the waterfront dock, the contingency he'd been carrying for 5 years. He thought about what it meant that she was not asking him to take care of something, but to participate in something she was already building. "Yes," he said, "whatever you need." She nodded once, the decisive nod of someone who has received the answer they were reasonably confident they would receive but needed to hear stated plainly. Then Cora appeared in the kitchen doorway with flour on both hands and her forearms and the front of her shirt, which was apparently the Ashcroft family relationship with baking, hereditary and inevitable. "Elna says we need more eggs," Cora announced. "She says someone has to go get them." "I'll go," Roman said. Cora looked at him with the evaluating expression that he was beginning to recognize as her specific face for assessing whether an adult was capable of a given task. "Do you know what kind?" she said. "Tell me what kind," he said. She told him, with the specificity and gravity of someone for whom pastry supply chain logistics were a serious matter. He listened carefully. He repeated it back. She found his repetition satisfactory and returned to the back room. Roman stood up from the table. His mother was watching him with an expression he did not have the word for and suspected did not have a word. The expression of someone witnessing something they had hoped for and had not been certain they would live to see. Lyra was watching him too, with something quieter, something that had the quality of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and is beginning to feel the weight of it distributed differently. He reached into his coat pocket. He had not planned this moment. He had thought about it, had thought about it for 11 days in a federal holding facility with nothing else to do, and had decided that the right moment was not a moment he could plan or engineer. It would be the right moment when it was, and it would not be diminished by being ordinary, by being a kitchen table instead of a skyline, by being flour-covered and bureaucratically supervised and accompanied by a grocery list for eggs. He set the ring on the table between them. It was small and unflashy. He had chosen it 5 years ago for exactly that reason, because Lyra had never wanted anything that announced itself. It had been in his coat pocket through the roof and the stairwell and the waterfront and the steel mill and the federal holding facility, through everything, unchanged. Lyra looked at it. She did not pick it up. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked at him. And what was in her face was not the simple answer of a simple moment, but the full weight of 5 years and everything they had built separately in them, and everything they were being asked to build together now, which was harder and more real than the thing they'd had before, which had been love without knowledge, love without test, love that had never encountered what it would do when the worst thing happened. This was the other kind. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know what I'm bringing to it and what I'm not. I know it's not simple, and I'm not asking you to make it simple." He paused. "I'm asking you to make it with me." Lyra picked up the ring. She held it in her palm and looked at it, and looked at him. And outside the facility window, the city was going about its ordinary morning. The light coming in at the angle of mid-morning in a city that had its own life entirely independent of everything that had happened in its margins over the last 2 weeks. Indifferent and continuous and entirely unimpressed. She put the ring on. She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at her hand and at the ring on it, and then she looked up at him, and what was in her face was not the uncomplicated happiness of a simple ending, but something deeper and less comfortable and more durable. The look of someone who has chosen a hard thing with full knowledge of its hardness and has chosen it anyway. "You owe me 5 years, she said. "I know," he said. "We'll work on it," she said. Outside, the city continued. Inside the back room, Elna Bosch was teaching 2 gray-eyed 5-year-olds the correct way to fold pastry dough, and Roman's mother was watching from the doorway with her hands folded and an expression that had traveled 11 years to arrive at this particular kitchen in this particular light, and Eli was listening to Elna with the focused attention he brought to everything that seemed to him worth understanding, and Cora had flour in her hair again and did not care. On a street called Callum, a bakery with blistered paint above the door was still open, as it had been every morning for 30 years. The smell of warm bread and cinnamon moving out through the door and into the street, and people who walked past it slowed down sometimes without knowing why, feeling something they couldn't name, something that had the texture of a thing remembered from before they had language for it, before they understood that the places where they felt safe were made by people who had decided to make them, deliberately, against everything that pushed in the opposite direction. 3 months later, on a rooftop above Callum Street in the early morning, the city spread out below them in the particular gold of the hour before it gets busy. Roman stood with Lyra and the twins, all 4 of them looking out at the skyline, and the moment had the quality of something that had been waiting a long time to exist and was now simply existing, without drama, without announcement, the way the most real things tend to arrive. He had his arm around Lyra. She was leaning into him with the ease of someone who has decided that ease is something you can choose, that it doesn't have to be earned back by time alone, but can be rebuilt by the quality of attention you bring to the present. Eli was leaning on the rooftop railing, looking at the city with the expression he always had when he was working something out. Cora was sitting on the railing ledge with Roman's hand on her back, looking at the sky, which had the particular colors of a morning that intends to be a good day. "Is this where you ran?" Eli said. He said it to his mother, but he was looking at the city. "Yes," Lyra said. "And now we're back," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. The word carried everything he had and nothing unnecessary, which was entirely his own, which was the person he was becoming, and it landed in the morning air and stayed there, simple and sufficient, the way the truth tends to be when it is finally allowed to just be itself. The city below them moved into its day. The 4 of them stayed on the rooftop a little longer, in the light, together.